Hey everybody, welcome once again to Rise of the GM, where today we're going to be talking about an enthralling bard. We're going to look at a tactless troubadour also, and we are going to talk about guilds, factions, and cults in this world-building series that we're in, here on Rise of the GM. All right, well, guys, we are so glad you could join us again. Today we are going to be hitting some fun parts of the world building.
Oh, yeah.
But we are in the midst of, by the way, we're sorry that this is coming on like maybe an hour and a half later than we usually do, or so, hour, 2 hours later. But we are in a season where there are auditions going on. Adam's wife works greatly with a theater there in town, and she is in the midst of auditions and such. And so Adam gets to care for the chitlins. And so chitlin duty brings us back a little bit. And so we're on here just a little bit later than normal, but we're glad that you all could see this whenever you see this, whether you're joining us live or whether you're watching it on a replay there on YouTube or on Spotify or Apple Podcast or whatever the case may be. We're glad you're with us today. We are going to get started with an enthralling bard, which is our encounter starter. Again, we have an encounter a book of encounter starters, and we like to kind of throw one of those out and talk about it just a little bit to give you a clue as how a GM might think about these books where they give you a bunch of little things to start and then you go from there. So we're going to start that today. Adam's going to be reading that, so you might hear Train in the background. He's kind of keeping himself muted while that train goes through, but we're going to throw him on, train and all, to talk about an enthralling bard.
Yeah. Hey, thanks everybody for listening and checking this out. This is Music for the Masses from the Eureka book, and it goes like this. A new performer has been captivating audiences in the area, and tales of his intoxicating music have spread like wildfire. Each show throws more kindling on the flames as fan fervor over this bard rapidly escalates. After each successive performance, there's an outbreak of sudden arguments, violence, and public, intimate encounters among those who attend. It seems that the bard's music inspires people to uncontrollable heights of passion. The PCs may be drawn in by noticing the ever-increasing hysteria, or when one or more of the PCs is in the audience for a show and becomes a devoted fan. A rival bard, well-versed in magical ways, covertly approaches the PCs. He tells them that the situation reeks of magic and gives the PCs a charm that will prevent them from being affected. He doesn't know exactly how it's being done, but he begs the PCs to stop the influence of the bard's magic before it gets out of control. While this conversation is taking place, rabid fans make an attempt to kill the rival bard, claiming this jealousy is driving him to undermine their hero. Fans display kindness toward anyone expressing appreciation of the bard's music and disproportionate anger toward anyone who seems ambivalent or disinterested. This results in many interesting fights or amorous advances for the PCs to become involved in. Fans might attack the PCs, causing a fight against innocents that must be handled carefully. And people may attempt to steal money from the party in order to throw it to the bard. Interactions with fans should make the PCs realize that tonight's performance will have a major consequence. If the PCs attend a performance, the bard himself looks worried. He understands that fans' reactions to his music are unnatural, but he can't seem to stop playing. He plays calming songs, but the fans scream for rousing jigs. Perceptive for rousing jigs. Perceptive PCs or those with magical abilities might notice the bard's instrument seems to be compelling him to play against his will. If the bard or his instrument is attacked, rabid fans will attack the PCs. If the instrument is destroyed, the effect will dissipate immediately, and the people will return to normal. Music for the masses.
Music for the masses. This is a good one. I like this one. I like the fact that you don't know that it's the instrument, right? So the very last line of that said, if the instrument's destroyed, whatever, everyone gets angry or the effect goes away, but your players don't know that. And so I think keeping that, don't too heavy handedly say, oh, it seems as though he's being forced to play. I would allow
Yeah.
that to kind of be a little bit more subtle. And then they would have to wonder, okay, is he
Mhm.
just a bard who is like entrancing people and
Right.
charming people? Or, and maybe you can like hint at it lightly so that maybe there's a question. But I
Yeah.
like everything from the rival bard that comes up that then may end up being like someone who interacts with your party again
Right.
because you guys work together in this.
Mhm.
I even like that he gives you this thing that might keep the charm from working on you, and then that might be useful later on in other parts of the campaign because hey, a charm's a charm, right? And I like the idea that there's all these people that are innocent, these innocents that you have to be careful. Just because they attack you doesn't mean you fight and kill them,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
really they're just under a charm. They're people in
Mhm.
the town who can't control themselves. And the same with the bard who's on stage playing. He doesn't seem to be able to control himself. It
Right.
all comes down to this sentient instrument. And so
Mhm.
I love the idea of, if you don't let your people know that this is so bad, maybe even one of them's a bard and they really start to covet that instrument. And then there's this whole encounter part that goes where he is now being enchanted to have to play. And your party's
Right.
like, what the heck are you doing? And then they begin to figure that out. And
Yeah. Yeah.
maybe even if they destroy it, he's like, I've lost the most amazing thing I've ever seen. What's that
Yeah.
going to do? So yeah, it's a pretty
Mhm.
cool encounter, and I do think you need to decide two or three possible encounter or battles per
Mhm.
se, not necessarily battles, but encounters where they have the opportunity to battle or the opportunity to
Right.
go another way. So you would have to people who are upset at you because you're against the bard and like
Right.
what's that going to look like, what's it going to evolve into. I'd plan something along that route in case it went that way. Also, if they get the idea that when you praise the bard or whatever that these people are super awesome and kind to you, what could
Mhm.
that look like, and
Right.
plan some of that out. And then kind of plan, what you're going to do with this rival bard when they all try to kill him. Obviously there's a protection kind of assumption there,
Yeah.
but not necessarily so. and
Mhm.
and then afterwards, what's going to be the personality of the rival bard, what's going to be the personality of the
Yeah.
bard
Right.
who was in trance, what's going to be the personality of the crowd once all this happens,
Mhm.
what's going to happen with the instrument. Could you find a way to harness it? It's lots of stuff you can think about
For
there
sure.
as you're building an encounter.
Yeah. Yeah. I like this one a lot too. And part of me was like thinking about this of like all the ways this could like go off the rails than what the like kind of intended thing is. And I like that you talked about like, yeah, there's what if you had a bard in your company and they're like, oh, I want that, kind of thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I want that. Uh, Rob says, just make sure you don't break into the bard's tent. Yeah. Watch out for that.
Always watch out for that. Tense.
um, I do like the what you were saying there, Matthew, of having like multiple kind of possible encounters and just the way that people interact. I think there's a lot of uh, it's an interesting situation to put them in to give both the muscle people some things to do or the magic people or like maybe combat oriented people. There's stuff in there that's probably going to happen, but there's also like I think a lot of chance for persuasion and deception kind of people. Whether you're like trying to calm some people down or just get information or even like, oh yeah, we love him, we love this bard so much. Like we're trying to like get the favor of the crowd to maybe have some things like I think there's that's a cool thing. Anytime you can have like multiple avenues and it's like whatever kind of player you have, I think that's a really cool thing. So I like that a lot. I like the even from a GM standpoint of being having like the emotional roller coaster of the way these people are, of being like one way or the other and being able to play that. I think that would be really important in that of like really, really, really just passionate because this is like happening. There was I cannot remember the show. I was thinking about this today. There was a superhero related show. I don't think it lasted very long, but I have this thing in my brain. It wasn't like Heroes, and it wasn't any of the like big ones, but man, I wish I could remember what it was. There was a guy. It was actually a villain who could uh, do something to people's. It was basically like spiked everybody's emotions. In a lot of way, it was like the Mistborn Sanderson like rioter, or like whatever the alternate of that is, the reverse, but where you're like making people's emotions either dampened or massively spiked kind of thing. And that was a really actually, for that show, I remember watching that, and it being kind of almost like a traumatic thing, because it was like what he did was inspired everybody's anger against each other, and they just like were essentially killing each other kind of thing. And I remember watching that and being like, that was like a really just kind of thing that stuck with me. And I was thinking about that with this group, of how something like that could go really, really crazy for the party if they're not taking care of this in a good way. But I really like the environmental challenge part of it too. I think there's some things you could do with this, and I wondered if you had any thoughts in this realm of. I immediately was going to like the way the Sentinels Comics RPG kind of runs when you have twists that cause challenges. It's like, okay, now that building's on fire because we did this thing, and now I got to save the people in the building as well as fight the big robot. I think there's some things that you could do maybe with this, and I don't know if any of that kind of spurred anything on for you, but
Well, my initial thought once you started talking, it was my chaotic neutral character brain started coming out, and I'm like, oh man, if I realized what was going on, I would start using this to my advantage. I'd be like talking to the crowd, and I'd be like, that guy down the street who sells things, who wouldn't sell me what I wanted, he hates this musician. everybody runs down there and starts tearing down his store, and then I go get what I want. That's probably not the most heroic thing to
true,
do.
true, yeah,
But yeah, no, I think very much it could be you try to solve it in one way or another, and the crowd's reaction then leads you to have a twist of something else you have to solve
yeah,
in its place. But I do think you could take away the chaotic neutral of that. But like, think about like you have all these people, and you need to accomplish something against, say the government or somebody who's like opposing you. You could edge them on pretty easily with manipulation. Now the problem is
yeah,
you're throwing innocence out in front of people you don't like, and
yeah.
who knows what might happen to them. So that might not be the best either. So
I was thinking it. I feel like you'd have to keep the bard out of sight from the party for some time during this encounter. Kind of, or it's not really even encounter, just like the situation that they're in, because that was one of the off the rails thing where I'm like, well, if you kind of have an idea, I could see a party just, we're going to go straight to the source. Why wait for the concert tonight? We're just going to go to his, I was thinking like his trailer, but it's probably not going to be a trailer for that. It's like thinking a rock concert. It's like his tent wherever he's
he's
staying.
got a
We're
little
just gonna,
wagon over there.
yeah, yeah.
Covered
Actually,
wagon.
yeah, that would be good. And it's like immediately, we're just going to go to the source and deal with this. And it's like, oh, he's not there, because I think that again, that's a way, I guess it's part of solving a problem. And now that I'm saying that, I wouldn't want to take that away from people. But if you wanted to have like a longer experience here, I definitely could see that happening. Could definitely
But
see someone trying to steal the item.
you can definitely wait to bring the rival in with the charm that keeps you safe. And
Right.
so,
Yeah.
like, if you
Yeah.
go to check him out early, maybe he plays and enthralls you or a couple people of your party. Just like I
Right.
said, if you would have been at a concert already.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's true. I did think that line was a little funny in the prompt of like your party going to a concert and becoming fans. I don't know if that's the kind of game I typically am running, but I did like, I guess you can kind of come up on it and it's like, oh man, they're awesome, So yeah, that was just kind of funny to me
or you
to
could
hear
just
that.
happen
So
to be in the tavern as he starts playing, and
yeah, that's
you
true.
get swept up in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I guess that's a player choice too. Of like, man, I'm all about that. So yeah, it was fun. I like the and you brought that up too of it's like innocent. They're innocent people who may be like literally trying to tear you apart because you don't like the person's music or something, and how you or just the fact you're trying to like break the instrument, they're going to come swarming up on stage and try to stop that. It's like, okay, probably shouldn't throw a fireball right now, because these are just a bunch of innocent townsfolk who are being rioted by this thing. How do you actually fight them all? Like how do you get creative and do things that are not lethal, to this? I think that is a cool challenge to put in front of people too.
And it's a sentient instrument. So think
Mhm.
about what personality it's going to have
Yeah.
in case somebody gets their hands on it. And what is the instrument? I mean, I automatically thought of like a lute, a guitar type thing.
Hmm.
Could be anything, It could be one of those little mouth harps where they're like, "Twang, twang, 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 twang,"
Yeah.
that'd be odd to see everybody getting super excited about that concert. But yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Well, let's move on to our main topic for the day. That's a good encounter, one maybe that you can throw into whatever you're doing, because you're always ending up in towns and in these taverns where, yeah, Snaky Jew's harp,
Yep.
but snarky. I read it snaky, but yeah, it you always end up in these tavern situations, and there's bards around, and this is one that can just kind of be a thing that you can throw in with whatever else you're doing. So keep that in mind next time your PC group is in a town. But we're going to go on right now and talk about the main topic. We're in is
Mhm.
this our third session of the World Builder series?
Somewhere in that,
I think it's our
should
third.
probably know that.
And this one is about guilds, factions, and cults. And
Yeah.
so, Adam, what are we talking about with guilds, factions, and cults? And how does that affect or influence world building?
Yeah. So this one is one that came a little bit from some just like asking around, but way before actually. We had, I don't know, more than a year ago, even we had thrown the idea about we were talking about this like podcast even being a thing, and I just kind of started asking gamers I knew like, hey, what kind of stuff would you want to hear about? And this is actually one that came from that questioning, and has kind of fallen in here into the world building kind. But um, I think it's interesting, and I was going back and realizing, like in my current game, how this has actually played a bigger role than even I like was intentional about, and how that's played quite a bit of that, where I think I was just trying to like populate the world in a lot of ways. And I think that's like one of the really cool pieces. We're always trying to develop our world more, as the party comes into a place. It's like, what is actually going on here? Like what's kind of the current events happening, or what are the people like, and what's the makeup of things. So like in my game, we started out with the Thieves Guild, and it's the Jade Masks is the Thieves Guild. They have these jade colored, masks. It's real on the head.
Super hard to understand where
Yeah.
that name came from.
I don't know. It just came to me, but yeah, they that's like a mark of them, and but it's the group that's kind of the highest functioning like thief guild in this kingdom, and they have aspects of them throughout different towns and such. It's like not just bound to the one city that you started in, kind of thing. And I liked that a lot. That was a setting in a lot of ways. I honestly think I knew, well, we know the story. Everybody's heard the story of how it wasn't meant to be a campaign to start with, but the Jade Masks were a thing before the city was a thing called Tifa's Edge. I knew that the masks were doing stuff before I even knew where they were doing stuff. So I kind of did things a little backwards there. So that was kind of a setting, and it was a way of beginning the game by being able to give you, hey, here's a mission that you're going to do because you're part of this, and that's what you do, kind of deal. And then that was able to like open up and have more freedom. But as things went on, both like developing that there. There is the Shining Guard, or kind of the more of the royal like defenders and guardians of the cities. So they're kind of working for the magistrates and things like that. That was kind of a group. We went on, and I'm not going to name them all off right now. We can come back to that later. But those things are all like ways I just felt like I was trying to develop the place and get a feel for the place more. So as the group went to different cities, like there's a place called Bullens, and it's run by a builders guild. And there wasn't a ton of engagement with the builders guild, but that was supposed to set the tone for even like what the city was. And there were some tiny little quests, kind of side things that went on with that too. And just trying to do that through the different cities that we'd hit on, or even smaller places, trying to give a feel that's different was a big part of that for me, as well as like having, I think I'm always thinking about like the ways to create more action for people, and whether it's like a threat or hostilities or a need, or those kind of things kind of can come from those in a lot of ways. So that's kind of like a basic thing, but I just wanted to talk through these a little bit today, and like how we've done them, how we've seen they've been important, kind of our thoughts on them. So how have you seen that, Matthew?
Well, I will speak directly to the Jade Masks for a moment. I think that idea of having these guilds that are not dependent in one city only, but they kind of go throughout the world, is a very interesting thing, and can give a greater sense of continuity. What I liked was we went from Tifa's Edge, where we were, not fledgling, we were lower level people in the Thieves Guild, in the Jade Mask, and we went up to Bullens. And while we were there, we actually were contacted by, although we were traveling with, kind of the head people of the guild, we were contacted by some people who were also part of the Thieves Guild there in Bullens. And I remember that was kind of cool. Apart from that, now I may be wrong, but I feel like, especially once we got to a place where we decided we're not really doing Jade Mask stuff anymore, like we haven't really encountered anybody who was Jade Mask, which I think what might be interesting, not to like force your hand as a GM, but like, is if you're, we went down to Rothman or wherever, and someone like comes up and like kind of cryptically says some words to us and kind of skulkingly looks around, and we're like, who the heck are you? And it's like somebody from the Jade Masks who's like, you guys are Jade Mask, right? Trying to get us in what we're doing. We're like, we don't do that anymore. It's like, oh, you don't leave the Jade Mask, and maybe there's like, parts of the world where we go where people are ambivalent, or not ambivalent, malevolent toward us. They're not happy with the fact that we left the Jade Masks, and that we knew some of the secrets and we just stepped out, and they're like, no, you can't do that. And so I think that idea of wherever you go, kind of the Jade Mask popping up. And so the other thing that I will say about that is, so when I hear the word guild, I can't hear guild without thinking of Guild Wars. And Guild Wars, we played, it was a video game a long time ago, a lot like World of Warcraft, but it was free. I mean, you bought the game, but the servers were free. And so you could just go on and play. And I don't even remember the guilds in that. I remember I was a mesmer or something. I remember the roles, but like this idea that maybe guilds, so this idea of Guild Wars is what I'm kind of playing off of. The idea that certain guilds maybe just don't ever get along, and what are they? And maybe that's dependent city to city, with whoever is the main guy in that city. And some guilds are probably more hierarchically structured, meaning throughout the world, they have more of the sameness from city to city because they have a structure that is greater than that city. And some, like the Thieves Guild in this city may be different than the Thieves Guild in that city and the Thieves Guild in that city. And they may have very different methods of operation even. One may be very much the stealthy ninja stuff. One may be the Chicago gangsters who want to take a Tommy gun and kill everybody they see, kind of thing. And so having those differences with guilds as well. So again, I didn't add a whole lot here. In my games, I was trying to think if I've so there are kind of the standard. I think someone mentioned this, maybe someone I was talking to. I don't even remember. You have the standard guild. So you got your thieves guild, you got your city guard, you got your, you know, like failing to come up with any other guilds right now. I know there are, but you have the ones that you see, the maybe the Bards Guild or the whatever.
Yeah.
But then I think you can use those, and you can give them their own personality from city to city. But you can also come up with basically anything. And I think one of the things that I guess we must have talked about this on one of these podcasts, because we got one of our questions in the haversack said something, perhaps the Perfumers Guild.
Yeah, Perfumers Guild.
So,
Yep.
weird things like that can sometimes be the more memorable types of guilds. So you have in your city, you decide you're going to have a Perfumers Guild, and then you've somehow got to populate that. And one of my cities, I had the Millers, they made bread. And so you got
Yeah.
the Millers Guild. But like, I think no matter who you have, what guilds you have, whatever ones you're going to prominently display or kind of make note of in your game, you need to have one or two personalities associated with those.
Yeah.
And if you do, that kind of sets the tone in people's mind, at least in that city, what that's like. So like I think in one of mine, one of my games, one of the players ended up being the son of the guy who was the head of the Thieves Guild. And so the idea that Todd's boy was in town, because his name ended up being Todd. But like the way they all talked and the way they tried to loop him in and get him into the, goings on of the city, and the way they talked very much left an impression on my players. For
Yeah.
what that Thieves Guild was like, at least in that city. So I think you need to have one or two personalities kind of planned out,
Right.
to think. So this is where those NPCs we do every time we're in here, you can go and find an NPC. And again, you don't have to go with their whole story of like, they're doing this bad thing and it might need to be stopped, or they're doing this. You can look at like personalities and just look through the personality section, the background role playing personality sections, and say, okay, here's somebody that'd be a fun one to play as, the guy in the Perfumers Guild. He's like, so not what you would expect from someone who makes perfume, because he's like super thick and heavy handed and like doesn't look like he cares a bit about high society or anything fancy. He's the Perfumers Guild. Maybe he stinks all the time, and when he walks into a room, everybody's like, oh, that's strong, man. So, I don't know, just kind of rambling there
Yeah, that's
about
good.
guilds and thoughts that might go into those guilds.
Yeah, I do think that's cool. That it's like that actually is a memorable, and it's not just really homogenous, kind of thing. As far as you walk in, yes, Thieves Guild, everybody's wearing dark, tight clothing and speaks gruffly to you. It's like there are some things that are actually like, oh, I remember these people because they have something unique about them. I do think
And in
is
my mind,
really cool.
those were the Chicago Thieves. They were like, hey, you're Todd's boy. You know what they
Yeah,
talk
yeah.
like? They got the very expressiveness about them. And sometimes that's going to give them their personality. It's different
Right.
than, like you said, like the silent, skulking, tight, black, ninja looking
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah.
different.
I like whether it's guilds or just like factions. Kind of that feels kind of a nebulous term, but then like or even the cults kind of thing. I like the idea of using those to just kind of explore like the power structure of the place that you're in, and kind of show that a little bit better to the group. So um, whether that's like somebody who maybe is working within the within the kind of say governmental structure, this is like part of that, or maybe it's a uh, city run guild, or it's a faction of people that maybe are about something specific connected to the government of the area you're in, or it's like more of that underground that the thieves guild, they're not really working with the city, they're working in the underbelly of the city or even at like odds with them kind of deal. So I think that's kind of interesting too to see just like power struggle within those places to just again develop a little more complications. And a lot of that stuff for me, it's like when you have more divisions of people, you don't want to get too crazy. I think you can get like overwhelmed if you make legitimately as many divisions of people in this way as actually are real. That may be like hard to like keep a track of, but if you have some of those key points of, this is a cult that is like working opposed to the magistrate of the city, and immediately now we have adventures that could happen on either side of that. I really liked, it wasn't a cult thing, but earlier in the game when the party was all in the main city that we started in, there had been given missions from both the Thieves Guild and from the High Magistrate, who was the law, of the city. And I really enjoyed watching that and seeing like, okay, how are they trying to bobble both of these at the same time? Which one's going to fall through the cracks? When are these going to become opposed to each other? Okay, there's this point where you can choose this, or there's all these problems happening in the city that the magistrate wanted the group to take care of. Meanwhile, the head of the Thieves Guild, the Jade Masks, wanted you to go out of town north with him to deal with this thing. Well, when they chose to go that way after dealing with a few things, but then that's going to affect things within the city. So I like even just the power struggle and power structure of things when you add some of these groups in, because they're not all working together in harmony typically, and that can create some interesting things there.
I even like the idea of defining what's the difference between guilds and factions.
hmm hmm
And so think about that in your mind. What's the difference
Yeah.
between a guild and a faction in your game?
Right.
In my game, or in my mind, I guess I would say guilds. So you think about real life, Screen Actors Guild, the Writers Guild. This is a place where people who have a profession kind of band together in order to make sure that they all prosper, right?
Right.
So
Right.
the Writers Guild gets together and they all like have a union, and they'll strike if they don't feel like they're being paid enough, and then they'll get paid more because all of the writers are together, and so
Right.
that feels like that's a very different thing than a faction. A faction feels like people within the same group who are splintered in purpose, right? So like at work, you may have a faction that's like, we need to do everything more technically and electronically. And you may have another faction that's like, we do too much online. We need to like kind of pull
Right.
back and be more hands-on and like interaction with people. And so you have these factions, these different ways of seeing things. So I love like kind of making sure that as a GM, you realize what is it I'm thinking of when I think of a guild versus when I think of a faction. So you're running a game right now where we just went to what could be, Rothman was a place where there is the college, the magical, what's it called? The Golden Lyceum,
Golden Lyceum, yeah.
the Arcana College sort of thing. And that could be like the guild, right? All people who practice magic kind of have a part in this because they want to see magic use treated correctly, whatever that is and whatever. But within that Golden Lyceum, there were factions, right? So there was, you actually let us help build some of those factions. And I don't know anybody else's because you gave me one to build and I got so excited about it.
Yeah.
I think I got way more excited than you even did about it. I ended up making this group called the IPS, right? The In Plain Sight. They're the illusionist. And all you gave me was, okay, this is the people with the School of Illusion. What's it going to be about? Like, who's the leader? What's it about? And you let us kind of help write that. Well, I ended up making this, the in-game version of the CIA, right? What's the CIA do for America? Well, you got the government, but the CIA is not, they say they have the head of the CIA, but really that's just a figurehead. And whoever is really pulling the strings on the CIA, they're doing a few things. They're gathering info, right? They're the
Mm,
information gatherers that you never know are there. They're the people who do the silent assassinations. You don't ever see them coming. You don't ever see them
mm,
going. They were there, and then they're the people who set up the puppet regime. So that's what I made this IPS.
yeah,
The
yeah.
people who were in plain sight, but you never knew. And so they
Mm,
have the acolytes who had like the thing, they had a little eye tattoo
right.
on their hand. That's the
Mm,
acolytes. But anybody who got above acolyte, that was taken away. That
mm,
was gone. And you had the person who was in power, but the person who was really pulling the strings, nobody knows who it is.
right.
And I love that idea. And I love the idea of like my character getting excited about being part of this information gathering and silent assassination
Hmm.
thing just because of who he is. And of course, we didn't really go very far with it yet.
Yeah,
Yet.
yeah, yet.
Yet. My guy's
Yeah.
about to become the major assassin information gatherer. But anyway,
Mhm.
again, that's like there were these factions. And so you gave us all, here's all these different factions within the Golden Lyceum,
Mhm.
within the magic users. And
Yeah.
again, I can't even remember what the other ones are, but everybody else probably remembers the one you gave
Right.
them to work on. So
Yeah.
again, kind of going back to how do you as a GM
Hmm.
set up stuff that people are excited about? I always go back to look at their backstory. So
Hmm.
what is it that like, we often have a character who's like,
Hmm.
I was apprenticing as a blacksmith. Well, it's like, okay, well, there can be a blacksmith type guild and maybe you're part of that. Or, I was a thief on the street. Okay,
Yeah.
you could be part of the thieves guild. So those things can happen
Hmm.
from their backstory. Maybe you can get more creative than the standards, but then also as you're going through the game, maybe pull some stuff like you did, where you're like, hey, you guys end up going to this place, and then you find out there are six, major. I forget there were eight
Eight.
families,
Yeah. Eight.
eight families, and they were all kind of heads of different areas of magic,
Hmm.
and you let us help as players to build and define what those were.
Yeah.
And then you took the things that we threw out to you and you made them even greater and
Right.
wove them together differently. But that idea of letting your players kind of cooperatively build some of those
Mm.
factions or guilds that are not the standard ones. So maybe it's like, oh, what do you know to be true about the Perfumers Guild? And you give that to one of your
Mm.
players and you say, you let me know this week, but via email. And they tell you, oh, this is the main dude in the Perfumers Guild, and here's his goals and
Yeah.
whatever. Then they get very invested in that, and it becomes a bigger part of the story. Thing that was maybe just a throwaway, oh, we go by and there's a Perfumers Guild, whatever, becomes, man, we're doing everything for the Perfumers Guild. And we found out that this is important and that's
Hmm.
important. And now I
Yeah.
become like one of the major perfumers because of blah, blah,
Right.
blah.
Yeah.
I have,
Yeah.
the magic of scent, or I don't know. I don't know if that's a thing, but yeah. So you get people in there
Mhm.
like that. So I'm sorry, I kind of went off on the difference between guilds and
No,
factions,
that's
but then
good. Yeah.
also how you as a GM can begin to use backstories to incorporate those
Hmm.
and give assignments to let them help create guilds and factions as you go through your game.
Yeah. 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 I'm glad you brought that up because that in my game currently right now, that probably is the best division of those two things of like this the college, the Golden Lyceum being that guild where there's I'm trying to think of the like what the word is for that exactly, but you're surrounded around the same kind of work or movement forward in a lot of ways, but the factions of they were called circles, but like you said, it was families, it was these great houses that basically had control over different schools of magic kind of thing. And so and they could be deposed. Like another family could come in and somehow wrest control of that. And that was an interesting piece too. But I maybe ideology in some ways for like the idea of a faction is like you're more surrounded around the ideology than you are around the like work.
Hmm.
Um, work's not the
Right.
right word, but I can't think of it. But
Profession.
profession, yeah, profession. Evan wrote like knightly orders, druidic cleric orders, and wizard schools can also make nice factions as
Yes.
patrons or nemesis for the party. And yeah, I like that a lot. I'm very there's like two ways I think I'm like really influenced when it comes to this stuff. And one is, in our backstories, we both talked about this of like that initial WoW game we played in. When I first started the kind of smaller game that was original to me, the city we started in was basically divided up into like four cults. There were four cults that basically were running the city. And they, as time went on, it was like we saw that it looked like harmony on the outside, but there was actually disunity and hostilities like going on under the surface kind of thing. Where I like, if I'm remembering it all correctly, like at one point, one of the cults basically absorbed the other cult and it became one faction of people. And then one basically got like destroyed, like annihilated kind of thing. And then there, it was leaving that. And then one was a pretty strong contender for like hostile situations throughout the game for that. Even going out of there. And that's like I think about that a lot when it comes to cults. I have a lot of influence in those things of whether it's more like canon religion type things within the games we're playing, or just like these smaller groups, how they can kind of be moving underneath society and affecting people and affecting the situation. So that's like a big influence for me in that. And then the other is like, I played a lot of Morrowind for a long time, Elder Scrolls 3. And, that one, a lot of it is based in, I guess it is houses, it's house like Redoron and house other things that I can't remember right now, and you kind of have to make some decisions. I think you actually can play all sides. There's also a Thieves Guild, and there's another type of Thieves Guild that you play with. And at certain points, you have to kind of make a decision on, like, where am I going to go and where am I going to like advance? But that's the thing for me. And you said something earlier that triggered that for me, Matthew, is I think like it's cool when you have these situations. There's a type of player that I think is going to want to jump in and advance or get titles or be promoted, and I definitely can fall into that. Like there's something like in that game, you wanted to like continue to do these jobs so you could get, you're not a footpad anymore. Now you're a, whatever. And I think that definitely has a little bit of a influence on me when I'm thinking about this in games too, of like, it's cool flavor. And I think for some players, that's like what they want is like a developed world with flavor. It's obviously an opportunity for like quest giving and missions and things, but also even for people to like advance in something and be like, oh, I'm the the grand master of the house of the divination, kind of thing now. And by the end of the game, you kind of have those titles, as well as just like, I'm not just level 20, I'm the grand master, kind of thing. So I think that can be really fun.
I think in addition to that, I think very much you can use guilds and factions and stuff to reward players, right? To reward PCs or to allow them to kind of feel a uniqueness. And so that can be with titles. It can also be with abilities. Say my guy does try to join the IPS, the in plain sight, the assassinations and covert everything. And somewhere along the way, he gets the ability to like chameleon, with his background, basically invisible, something that his character may or may not have been able to do. That can be like a big reward for them, especially if it's about playing that out sometimes. Or an item, they get an item from the faction or guild to help them with whatever they're doing. Those kinds of little rewards really mean something to players.
Yeah,
and you don't want to do it just all the time. Don't make them worthless. So that when you do hand them out, they're like, oh, I got this, and then they build a lot of their identity around that. And kind of going back, I looked at the difference between guilds and factions. I felt like guild is like kind of a gathered profession. Factions are, like you said, the ideology that's split, whether that's within a guild or within a town or whatever. There's these different factions. Cults are those things, and I think they always have this highly religious overtone, but I think they deal with the gods and the supernatural, like demons and anything religious or in that sense. And so when I see cults, that is not around like necessarily a faction of people, although they could be a faction. It's not a guild. This is like a fanatic group of people that are all about this one thing that's greater and me doing for that greater thing. So I love myself a good cult in any city you go into.
Yep.
And typically, I think we think of cults as like, okay, this is the bad. There's a cult down there and they're trying to take over and they're sacrificing babies and doing crazy stuff. And you got to go in and clean them out. And I've had several of those and that's good. But there can also be cults for groups that you might want to be part of. So like, I forget whose game it was or who was the, boy, I've lost all my words. The crow goddess.
Oh, Raven Queen.
Raven Queen,
Yeah.
the crow goddess. It's kind of what the trackers call her. Hey, crow goddess. The Raven Queen came to me in one of our games, and like I had a vision or whatever, and then there were other people that had to do with the Raven Queen, and I remember feeling such a sense of identity and player drivenness just because of this visitation I had from the Raven Queen. And I know that we have that same sort of thing right now. Pip with
Saluni.
Saluni. Boy, I just don't remember names of these gods. But anyway, these things, these cults of people don't have to be like evil, baby sacrificing things.
Yeah, right.
There can be cults that are very fanatic about someone that your player can have a sense of caring about too. So,
Yeah.
The idea is of being able to understand the differences between a guild, a faction, and a cult, and then how to use those in your game to, I think ultimately it comes down to a couple things. It comes down to how do you make your world real? That's why it's in the world builders session here, right?
Yeah.
It also goes with how do you motivate your characters? And so there's lots of things you can motivate your characters with, but boy, you can do a lot through guilds, factions, and cults as far as like their progression, their growth, their uniqueness, them feeling special in the world because they're special in this faction or in this guild or in this cult. There was another part of that and I just lost it. But these things are important in more areas than just one. It's not just like, okay, I've always heard there's a thieves guild, so there's a thieves guild. You can do that, but it's not going to really further your game very well. The things that you use to grow your characters, that's what's really going to make a difference in your game, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was thinking about if so you're out there, or we're like populating a campaign right now and thinking about like where do you even start with that kind of thing. I love thinking about backstory, thinking about the things that are going to hook someone, and even asking like like kind of like what makes sense in this moment. I'll go back to the Builders Guild. That wasn't like an initial thing. And I love this talk about Bullens. It's just a town, nothing too special. There was a lot of game played in it. And I loved the whole arc around that because more and more and more it just got developed as people engaged with it. And it's like, oh, is there something like this there? And that was a lot of fun to bring that in there. But there was a town prior to that as they were traveling northward that had been I guess you all kind of came into an attack. Like there was an attack. I think it was Knolls. It was low level. Knolls were coming in. They were attacking. You all came in, fought them off. But a lot of the town had been pretty devastated. The small village, several buildings burned, and as there was kind of a pause in the game for me, I think it was like between sessions. I was thinking, well, what would this kind of elder person need who has been talking to them? They need resources to like rebuild. Winter's coming. It's like they're going to do that, and so that was immediately like, well, what's something that could connect to that? Well, upriver in Bullens, now there's a builders guild who are kind of controlling the kind of power structure of the town in a lot of ways, and this elder can say, hey, think it was Ozoff. Here's $100 or $100, 100 gold pieces. Can you go to the Builders Guild, drop my name, tell them we need stuff sent downriver that's on this list, kind of thing. And that was just another way of like, okay, there's some reality, kind of realism to this, but also tying that in. And you all jumped directly into Mullins, but that was even like an in of, okay, if they show up and they're like, we have no idea what to do in this place, at least there's this movement into a group that's in the city, and that could lead to more things. So that was kind of the thought process there. A lot of it's about building the world out for me, I think, but asking kind of like what's needed, what's going to connect to backstories, what makes sense in a city or place that you're going to be. And then, like Matthew said earlier, adding those, like what are the personalities that are going to be a part of this to make this like interesting and gripping for people to jump into. Wanted to make note. Rob had said, like the man who was Thursday when you were talking about the in plain sight people, and I looked it up. Well, I don't know anything about that except for I just looked up some stuff about G.K. Chesterton. It looks like wrote that, and it sounds very similar to kind of the stuff you're getting into. It sounds really interesting, and I kind of want to read that now. So,
Oh yeah.
thanks for the drop there, Rob. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about this idea in the questions section. So what do you think about talking about an NPC?
I'll end one more comment
more
here,
thoughts? Okay.
and we'll hit the NPC, and that is this: cults. As you think about your end game and whatever that is, it's important to recognize that people who are in various guilds or factions can be in a cult. And so somebody who is the Shining Guard head captain, and somebody who is one of the Jade Mask thieves, and somebody who is in the government, this, whatever, could all be part of a cult together secretly. And so that can always make it really interesting when they get to the end and there's like connections they did not see coming from people they did not expect to be in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Definitely agree with that. That actually made me kind of think here in terms of just bouncing ideas again. The idea of like the cult, they're in this game that we're in right now. There's a larger kind of situation happening, and it's not, this is like known to the players, but there is a larger kind of entity that has been had been captured millennia ago. But there's this problem with the basically it could be released. It's like a thing that there's a possibility that it could be released, that different entities have wanted to mess with the chains that are have it in bonds kind of deal. And so that's the thing that's going on. But even before they were known about that, the party stepped into a cavern for reasons and kind of came across this cult that was looking at trying to bring into the world the entity that they were trying to worship, basically. And so they're trying to bring that in. The group stopped that from happening. And one of the things that was doing was like I was kind of throwing that cult into the mix, and there's been some other moments where it's been talked about. The party's engaged with it a few times. Again, kind of developing the world. But one of the things that was doing was it was like mimicking a larger thing and trying to do some foreshadowing of that, even with the way they were doing things. They were kind of a smaller group that was trying to bring in an entity that didn't need to come into the world. It was going to be a bad deal if that happened. But meanwhile, there's this like world ending entity that people are trying to bring back into the world. And that was just some of that. So you can kind of do some things with that too, even of these kind of groups or the things that they're going after. It doesn't even have to be connected really even to cults factions, guilds. It could just be, other ways you can foreshadow, but that was a thing that I did in my game to kind of work the kind of cult angle to kind of push forward into a new piece of that. So that's one of the things I was kind of doing with that too. Do you have any kind of final thought on that, Matthew, of what you were saying?
I don't remember. Everyone, my
Yeah.
computer has been crazy. I did crash in the middle of that. And again, Adam carried us through. So I don't know exactly what he was saying. I don't even remember what I was saying at the end, but it was all true, and take it all to heart. Don't forget any of it.
It's probably
I
good
will
you
go.
didn't hear all of that because you're in the game that I'm saying, and maybe
Oh,
now there's some secrecy still. So
all right. Well, I'm going to go back and watch it as soon as this is
yeah.
done.
Rob said there in the chat, he said, makes me think of Hail Hydra, which I don't know if you'll connect with, Matthew, because of the movies, but it's an Avengers thing, and all these people are part of the Hydra organization, but they're throughout, government and other. It's like anybody could be part of Hydra kind of thing, and it's pretty
Right.
interesting. So
Right.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
All right. Well, let's go on to our NPC. Our NPC
yeah.
today, one that you could drop into a campaign you're using if you would so need, is Benny the Bard, right? And so he's our tactless troubadour. His appearance is finely chiseled features, right? He has a handsome face, a winning smile. He dresses fashionably, and he's well aware of his charms. He knows he's charming. He's always the first to initiate a conversation, greeting people with a winning smile and initial compliments. But after an exchange or two, he almost always manages to blow it with a brutally honest assumption or observation, right? And he delivers the lines in a very matter-of-fact way. So he'd be someone who's like, "Oh, you are quite beautiful, madam, even with that ugly mole on your forehead." And so he would say stuff like that people would then take askance. His personality is friendly. He's outgoing, but unfortunately, he's also brutally honest. His motivation in your game or wherever is that he just wants to find inspiration for his songs as well as romance. He's still looking for that. His background: Benny the Bard is a great musician and has many other talents helpful to his adventuring friends. Unfortunately, Benny's assets are always outweighed by his single liability, and that is he can't help but blurt out brutally honest comments that invariably insult the person to whom he's speaking. This could be very fun, by the way, as a GM to be running him. Benny blames this on a curse, right? Every time somebody asks him about it, he says he was cursed, but no one knows Benny. Nobody who knows him can ever remember a time in his life when he wasn't like this. And so there's probably some doubt there. Oddly, Benny doesn't generally criticize his traveling companions. Occasionally, Benny's, quote, curse indirectly reveals useful information. For instance, or for example, he once insulted an ambassador by commenting on his duplicitous eyes, and then it turned out that the ambassador was involved in a plot to assassinate the local duke. So you have this guy, and I love this one because this is neither bad guy nor good guy. He's just a neutral dude who happens to be around, and it sounds like he maybe kind of teams up. So I love how these things. Again, we didn't necessarily plan these, but this one, I don't know if you planned this one, but this one, along with the bard, the music for the masses, you got the rival bard and you got the bard who is like at the mercy. Either one of them could be this guy. The rival bard doesn't seem to be well loved by people. Maybe he's this guy who he comes and he seems winning and he seems like everybody would love him. And then he says stuff that just puts people off because he's a little too brutally honest and nobody ever remembers a time when he was otherwise. And so he's trying to help out at the party and somehow falls in with you guys. And you do, when you're in towns, he is there to give you information, but he also, it'd be a fun thing as the GM to play this character every time somebody else was around that your PCs are trying to ingratiate themselves to, and he's just insulting them, without even realizing he's insulting them. So this could be a fun NPC in your game, in that encounter that we looked at earlier, but in any game, because like I said, what group of PCs don't end up at a tavern where there's a bard playing? You could throw this guy in anywhere.
Yeah, this one definitely could be. I do like it, and I think it would be a lot of fun because it's one of those you're able to poke at, even if say he was with them and somebody crit failed and dropped their sword or something ridiculous, and just like, oh, you fought pretty well, but kind of made a fool of yourself when you dropped your sword. But anyway, it's like you can kind of poke at those things too. Even I love the idea of they're trying to like persuade somebody, and he's over there like wrecking the negotiation, kind of deal too.
Yeah. And to
I
do it with that like winning attitude and
yeah,
smile that just is so confident. He's like,
right.
our great and mighty valiant soldier who drops his sword at every battle he fights. You're just like,
Brave Sir Robin.
it's almost like people will just get so upset whenever he starts talking. Brave Sir Robin ran away. That's
I
classic.
I really like this as a case in point for like during character creation to have things like vices, or I can't think of the right word. I wrote blemishes down, which is not what it is, but
They all
you
have
know,
moles on their
yeah,
forehead.
I have but to be like a little more maybe detailed with some things, or just like maybe some things that you would consider negative about your character too.
Mhm.
There used to be like a system even. I'm trying to remember what that was in, which if that was like a 3-5 or 4 something, where
I think even in 5e, when
5e
you're
is
doing
that.
out those traits, it's
Uh-huh.
like here's some personality traits about you.
Okay.
You'll what is it? I'm trying to remember because mine has some of these. It's
Okay.
like
Yeah.
they have some that are kind of like a negative thing that's just
Okay.
part of your character
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that you almost see as a positive.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that like that's a good case for doing that with your characters. And like as a GM, obviously I haven't looked very good if that's the case for your 5e character, but excuse me. But
I'm gonna pull mine up because I've got internet here. So while we're talking, you
um,
just keep talking. I'm
yeah,
gonna find
no,
it.
but I think that's a cool like a case for that of um you can use that in a lot of ways, and you can kind of press on those things. But if you have somebody like Benny the Bard who knows that, um Eliakim's eye droops weird, like in some way, and he just keeps pointing that out. It's like that. Does that like make a major story moment? No, but it's fun,
Yeah,
and
here we go. I got it.
uh,
So if you go to your D&D Beyond and you go to the description, down at the bottom you have personality traits.
okay,
So you pick two. I always have a plan for what to do when things go wrong. And then the second one is I don't pay attention to any risk in a situation. Never tell me the odds.
yeah,
Okay. But then there's ideals, there's bonds, and then there's flaws, which is kind of what you're
flaws.
talking
That's the
about.
word I was
So
trying to. Yep, yep.
the flaw for this guy is if there's a plan, I'll forget it. If I don't forget it, I'll ignore it.
That
And that
sounds
pretty
right.
much sums up my character, right?
Which is always great for the 45-minute planning sessions that happen. So, yeah, and again, that's a 5e. It's a 5e thing, right? But
Yeah.
yeah, Rob's saying several systems let you take a flaw to boost something, and I do remember us playing at
Oh
the
yeah.
table where it was like if you take that flaw, you get a +2 to this skill, or maybe something. There's
Then you've
probably
got my
better
character
things than
who
that,
who
but
looks like he shouldn't be let out of the back bedroom because he has like 17 flaws because he's trying to get all these bonuses. It's like, hi everybody.
I'm very strong. Yeah.
He's
So
just super strong.
so
I don't
I
think they
think
let you
that's
boost more than once.
no,
But
probably not. I like that. I also like kind of pulling back to Benny the Bard. I love that idea, the duplicitous eyes thing, and that like you could use him to drop hints. If there's something where he's pointing out, and it's just like, oh well, Benny's kind of a jerk sometimes, or he's just so blunt. It's not even being a jerk; it's just he's so blunt he doesn't even realize. Um, but like actually giving real information through those things, like the duplicitous eyes thing, I like that idea a lot to like pass information in a way that's not just hey here's the fact kind of
this guy's a
thing.
bad guy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not you kind of get that. And I while you were reading it, the thing that came to mind is like, what if Benny talks about the curse, but what if Benny actually was like a diviner? Like he actually, these things he's saying are things that he innately can understand that like other people don't really see. Like I think you could even broaden that out of like this curse that he has, using my air quotes again, for you listeners out there. The curse is like actually like, what if it was a gift, or kind of thing. And you can kind of play with that too. So I like him. It would definitely be fun to have him around for a little while.
And you definitely, as a GM, you need to have some fun NPCs, ones that can say whatever you want them to say.
Hmm. Yeah. Evan says Benny's so honest he can see through illusions and lies. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we're getting deep here. So I want to go back real quick to the encounter because we're still talking about bards.
Okay.
What if it was a Highlander situation with these bards, the rival bard, and so he's trying to clear this thing up, but what he's really trying to do is knock out competition because there can be only one true bard. Just saying. Love it. It can be only one.
And you have to behead the bard.
Yeah, right. It's the only way. It's the only way. Well, we have.
Let's look in our haversack. I see if we got any questions for this week before we wrap up today.
We've got one haversack question today from Wataya Hotel, and the short of it is how to make factions more interesting. And we've kind of talked into that a little bit, but I think we can develop a little more. He says, "Dear Matthew and Adam." Oh, this is a haversack question, Divergent edition, and there's a little PS at the end explaining that.
Oh yeah, Divergent had factions.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Dear Matthew and Adam, I hope your dice are rolling well and that your players are loving their campaigns. I wanted to ask about how you might make factions more interesting. We're all familiar with the stereotypical Thieves Guild. It's kind of what we talked about earlier. Thieves Guild, the Stoic City Guard, order that's the same everywhere you go, the rowdy but basic tavern, the other basic fantasy tropes. But what are your ideas on how to spice these things up? Are there ways to add a lot more depth or intrigue with these things? Or do you have any ideas of exotic or interesting new factions? Let's say some sort of Perfumers Guild, if you will. I will say one 5e group that's been interesting to me is the Salt Marsh's Faithful Quartermasters of Lez, an immigrant faction from the north that hires people to help them gather fish for their starving people and locates and sells a variety of magic items. For me, this added some depth and made me think more about what other people are doing in town other than just the government and the merchants. Thanks for everything. Sincerely, Wataya Hotel 98. P.S. Divergent has factions in the film and book. It's getting harder and harder to find fitting movie titles. LOL.
Oh, you just keep going. You can do it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It's great. Yeah, I like that. I like that too. I think that was that's a way if you're out there listening or watching, like Divergent's a thing you've seen or read, like that's a really, I think, a good way to think in that terms too. Yeah. So any kind of like parting shots, I have some thoughts kind of based on what he was saying. So I'll kick it off here. A question to answer the question that I have is like, I think that we can ask is when does actually familiarity like help the situation and actually help the plot? Like as I was reading those things, it's kind of like, oh, here's the basic things, here's the thing you're used to, here's the tropes. And I do think that you can kind of weigh some things. I don't know, like I'm gonna kind of ask Matthew, like, have you experienced that, or maybe a time when it's like, I definitely want to do something different. But there are, I think there are times when the familiarity of the thing actually helps advance it more than if I like did something like really completely different. And so I was kind of thinking about that in terms of when he was talking about the Thieves Guild or that. Thoughts come to mind kind of with that question.
So I think I've already talked about this a little bit. For some, I like to try and twist the feel of them a little different than what you would expect. So I already talked about like the Thieves Guild being like the Chicago Mafia Thieves Guild versus the Ninja Slick Never See Them Thieves Guild.
Yeah, right.
That was fun to do, and it caught people off guard a little bit. But it's really hard to think with some. So like the city guard, who are supposed to be lawful, if they're actual, in fact, the policing of the realm for good and not like corrupt. It's hard to think of how to make a lawful good person. This is part of why I always play chaotic neutral. I just have a hard time figuring out how to make lawful good people interesting. And we have some people in our campaigns who always play lawful good, Chris, and he does a really good job of making them interesting. But in my imagination, I just can't. It's hard for me to figure out, how do you do that? How do you
Yeah,
make
yeah.
how do you make the city guard more interesting? Maybe some of our watchers have comments or thoughts on how you do that. For me, it's always easier to take people who have a little bit of chaotic or a little bit of criminality in their background and twist those people who are just always good. It's like that paladin, unless which was kind of funny in the movie, right? The paladin who just was always straight and upstanding and whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't have like a lot of good ideas off the top of my head on how you make these factions more interesting, except for that idea, like you said, the Perfumers Guild. You find you can basically look at anything and make it an organization if you're really creative.
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess you just have to sit down and think, what would make some awesome organizations in this city that they may have never seen before. So we'll start with the Perfumers Guild, but we'll also have this guild and that guild, and you come up with some very crazy ones and make those central to your story. That could be fun and interesting. I think maybe I would sit down and look at like society and government and try to look at like societal roles to get ideas of stuff if you're like running dry. I should have done some of that before coming on here today, and then I could give you those examples, because that's what I should do as a good Rise of the GM host, but I did not.
Yeah. Evan made mention here, the inner circle of the faction can have different motives than what the faction advertises to the public. I think that makes sense. A lot of, there's the kind of persona that's being shown, but there's actually other things going on, like whether it's nefarious or not. I had written down here like factions within factions, which I feel like kind of connects to what Evan's saying there. I think that's a way to make it interesting and more complicated, even of, use the Thieves Guild. It's like, okay, all these people, probably especially the Thieves Guild, but anything you use, it's like they're not all this exact same cookie cutout person who all are like blindly just, I am only here to steal gold and give it to the master of the guild. Like, they all have their own reasons for being there. They have reasons for even becoming a thief in the first place. And maybe there's some people who have like those ideologies that are different of these people are part of the Thieves Guild because they want to rob from the rich and give to the poor. But these people just want to get revenge on people they feel like hurt them. And these people just can't help themselves, and all those things kind of make it different. And sometimes those things are opposed to each other too, even within that idea. So I think that's one way to just to make it a little more interesting. I thought about the guards thing that was in the question. That really like stuck with me. I've mentioned Monster Man, the podcast he does, and he did a special episode on guards. And one of the big things that stuck with me on what he was talking about was looking back at like history a little bit of the way that like we have this idea of the city guard, and I don't know even where that exactly comes from. That didn't retain, but that like a lot of, if we're looking back at medieval kind of the time frame that a lot of games are somewhat based in, that's not really how things worked. It was like volunteers, or you're conscripted for the month to be guard, or like it wasn't like as much of, oh, there are these people who this is their job that they're making a living off of. A lot of places, especially smaller places, it's like, you have a sharp object, so can you please walk around? Or it wasn't even necessarily like about what should I say, stopping crimes, as it was like investigating crimes. Like there's some of that too. And I think we can play with that a little bit. Again, I don't know that we have to be hyper realism all the time, but you can play with that idea of, okay, in Tifa's Edge, there's the Shining Guard who actually are like paid by the crown to keep the peace in this place. But we're going to go up here to Keent, is like one of that little town. It's like they have a dude who happens to own a sword. And so he walks around at night making sure everything's good. All the torches are lit kind of deal. And I think like that's a way to make some variation. That again, that's just the guards, but that kind of principle of, in Bullens, even the way they present themselves, it's like in Bullens, maybe all the guards always carry these pikes around because Bullens is kind of marshy and there's a lot of waterways that go through the town. And maybe they could use that pike to kind of semi pole vault over the water to get to another patty, every time. And there's reasons that they even have things like on them that are like specific to the places they're at. So I think you can do some things with that of like thinking through location, purpose, to make it a little more interesting than just like, okay, another dude in chainmail with a long sword is now talking to you kind of thing. I think you can spice it up in those ways too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go. And I'm sure that on our social media stuff, some of our followers probably have some other ways that you can make factions really interesting, and you can incorporate those. So do follow us on those social.
That'd be a good question to ask for sure, and see what everybody has to say. There was good conversation about some things this past week regarding like world building. So definitely encourage you all, if you get a chance to do that, check that out and see what some other GMs are doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, guys, I think that brings us to the end of this episode of Rise of the GM and this session of world building. What's next time, Adam?
We are looking at cosmology and planes next time.
So we're continuing in world building, cosmology, and planes. Come back to see what that's all about. Jump on our socials to continue this conversation, and we'll see you guys next time on Rise of the GM. Thanks for joining us.
See ya.